Hi, I'm Sara.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode. Introduction. Who are we, and what are we doing?
Sara. What movie are we doing this week?
This week, in honor of the 2024 Olympics, we will be talking about race. And Rena, can you give us the trigger warning?
This movie contains depictions of racism and Nazis. Sara, can you think of anything else that I may have left out?
That about covers it. And Rena, can you please give us the spoiler warning?
Sara, as usual, we are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points of other works of narrative art that have nothing to do with race. Consider yourself warned. Just for the record, what happened the day that we're recording this, Sara?
Oh, no biggie. Joe Biden announced he will not be seeking the renomination for president. So just having a lot of confusing feelings.
Just to give you a little context, since this will be coming out in a couple weeks, who knows what'll have changed?
Yeah.
If you're listening to this in 2032.
Who knows what'll have changed by the time we drop this episode? So our source material for this episode includes Triumph, The Untold Story of Jesse Owens and Hitler's Olympics by Jeremy Schopp, and Berlin 1936, 16 Days in August by Oliver Hilmes.
Sara, can you please tell us a little bit about Jesse Owens and the movie Race?
I would be happy to. From our friends at Wikipedia, James Cleveland Jesse Owens, born September 12, 1913, died March 31st, 1980, was an American track and field athlete who won 4 gold medals at the 1936 Olympic Games. Owens specialized in sprints and the long jump and was recognized in his lifetime as perhaps the greatest and most famous athlete in track and field history. He set 3 world records and tied another, all in less than an hour, at the 1935 Big Ten track meet in Ann Arbor, Michigan, a feat that has never been equaled and has been called the greatest 45 minutes ever in sport. He achieved international fame at the 1936 Summer Olympics in Berlin by winning 4 gold medals, 100 meters, long jump, 200 meters, and 4 by 100 meter relay. He was the most successful athlete at the Games and, as a Black American man, was credited with, quote, single-handedly crushing Hitler's myth of Aryan supremacy. Just put a pin in all of those accolades. And then the movie Race is a 2016 biographical sports drama about Jesse Owens, directed by Stephen Hopkins and written by Joe Shrapnel and Anna Waterhouse. The film stars Stephan James as Owens, and co-stars Jason Sudeikis, Jeremy Irons, William Hurt, and Carice Van Houten. It is a co-production of Canada, Germany, and France. It was supported fully by the Owens family, the Jesse Owens Foundation, the Jesse Owens Trust, and the Luminary Group. The film was a commercial success and received mixed to positive reviews, winning 4 Canadian Screen Awards, including Best Actor for James. And the movie had a $5 million budget and a $25 million box office. So absolutely a success. This movie, I'm gonna stand pretty hard for this movie in a lot of ways. I was really impressed by this movie for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, I think you heard up top that I said $5 million budget. Like, there's a lot of employing of the technology that we have available to us now. There's a lot of green screen in this movie. You're not seeing actual things built for this film, but I was really impressed by what they were able to do.
I too was impressed on how they did a lot with a little.
They shot in Canada, but made it look like the US. They did do some shooting in Berlin. But for example, when Jesse Owens walks into the stadium at the Olympic Games and looks around, that's all fake. If you look for humans in the stands, in a lot of the shots, you're not going to find humans. You're going to find things that look like humans.
I watched this on a Delta flight from San Francisco back to New York. I was very impressed because I was watching it on a roughly 5x7 screen on the back of a seat.
I was clocking it because I'm always looking for that now. Are the people real? Are the people like in cut and pasted and repeated? I'm always looking for that now, but I would not describe it in any way as disruptive to the experience of watching and enjoying the movie, even on a bigger screen. Also, I do call it out to point out the accomplishment of getting this movie made and of making this movie and making it look as good as it looked, because every dime of that money is on the screen. And you think about how much they spend on a Marvel movie, and some of those look like shit. Excuse my language.
I think this was a good example of how to do a lot with a little.
Yes, I was very proud of what they pulled off in this film. I found myself feeling very, very impressed by filmmaking behind it and the creativity. None of that use of technology detracted from the drama that was happening on the screen. It didn't distract me. It didn't feel like it was insisted upon. It didn't feel like they were doing it because of any reason except that that was what the budget would allow. Like, you can't get 110,000 people in that stadium again in this day and age. And not have your movie cost $200 million. I was really impressed by how the drama of the storytelling wasn't pulled away from by all of the technology that they needed to use to tell the story.
Yes. So with that, Sarah, can you take us in?
Yes, of course. So we start with Jesse Owens getting ready to go to Ohio State University. We see him running a lot and getting ready to go to school. And then we are meeting Jason Sudeikis, who is playing Larry Snyder, who is the coach of the Ohio State track and field team. There was a really good piece of narrative nonsense here where we find out everything we need to know about Larry Snyder's backstory because they're talking about it on a radio show. And I love when a movie can accomplish getting a backstory in that way. And we see him trying to figure out what the heck to do with his track team, which is not performing well. And he gets a stack of profiles of potential students, and one of them is Jesse Owens.
Yes. We see Jesse Owens's relationships with his family. We can see that he's his mother's pride and joy, and that his relationship with his father, who is embittered and out of work, is more complicated. And we learn that Ohio State is losing a lot. And I really enjoyed Jason Sudeikis in this movie. I thought his performance had a lot of heart. He is sort of playing a more bitter version of Ted Lasso a little bit, but that's also just Jason Sudeikis.
Yeah, I really enjoyed his performance in this film. Also, at this point, we find out that Jesse has a girlfriend and has a child with that girlfriend, and his girlfriend's coworkers are quite dubious of him. I thought that, like, just even in this opening, and they do this throughout the movie, they do a really good job illustrating the experience of being Black in our terrible racist country, in the little ways, that the microaggressions that happen to you as a Black person in this country.
When he and his friend get on that bus for Ohio State, they immediately go to the back. And then later on, they can't use the showers at the same time as the white athletes. And there's this one scene where Jesse Owens goes to see Larry Snyder in his office, and he hasn't gotten to use the shower. And I feel so embarrassed for him because I felt like conscious of that feeling of putting your clothes back on after you've worked out when the shower is not working at the gym, and how gross it feels, and then having to go have this important conversation with the guy who brought him here. I felt for him.
It sucks. Larry's kind of a jerk to him at first. He isn't going to be sort of like the warm and fuzzy coach for a bit. And also, we get ourselves a timeline right here, which made me so happy. It says 28 months. We need to run in the Olympics. That means over the next 28 months, you give everything you have to me.
And there's this one moment where Coach Snyder tells Jesse to look him in the eye. But I'm sure he's like trained himself not to look white people in the eye out of fear.
Yeah.
And the relationship that builds between them is beautiful.
And then we cut away to the Olympic Committee, which is totally corrupt. As it's always been. And I have a note here that I just wrote. Why do we do this? I'm not sure what that was in reference to, but maybe all of it, like just listening to the whole notion of the games aren't political, but of course they are. The rationalizations that everyone choosing event locations like this, the Olympic Committee, FIFA is a really good example of a wildly corrupt organization that they have to go through to do their jobs is really something. This conversation underscores the entire notion of how useless it is for a country to boycott the Olympics and how useless it's always been in terms of who bears the brunt of the consequences for that. And and we see some really accomplished actors in this scene. The late William Hurt, who's probably also a terrible person, but was a great actor. And Jeremy Irons plays Avery Brundage, who ultimately engages in a super corrupt compromise here that we'll talk about when we get there. And they're talking about whether or not America should go to this.
The location of Berlin had been selected before Hitler came to power, and then Hitler came to power. So the plans had already been in place. And you sort of see that casual anti-Semitism that allowed things to get as far as they did.
There's big what's the worst that can happen energy happening all over this meeting. There's a lot of that, listening to what people are saying when they talk to you about what they believe and, not trying to reinterpret around it so you don't have to be uncomfortable. Not that we've ever had this problem since then. So they're kind of figuring this out, but it seems like a foregone conclusion that America needs to show its face at these Olympics, but also there's still some debate about it. And, and Avery Brundage is going to take that message over to Germany that America's waffling on it. They sell him on the idea of waffling no more eventually. It's a huge, gross bummer, especially because Avery Brundage got to run the Olympic Committee until he died in 1975. Put a pin in the results of what happened here and the consequences and who got to bear the brunt of those consequences. A country is chosen by the IOC. Maybe it wasn't as bad when they chose it, but things got bad or something happened that made everybody like, oops, we can't do this here. Who gets asked to take responsibility for that? The athletes. Most of these people have a 2 to 4 year window to be truly successful at their sport. So the Olympics that they are being asked to boycott are the Olympics that they are going to get to go to. Probably all of that responsibility falls on them when really the responsibility should start with the IOC being more thoughtful about how they choose a location and then making decisions about where that location is if things go sideways in that country. I was kind of furious at this, watching this, and also just ultimately how toothless it is to boycott an Olympics. Like, who cares if a country doesn't go? It doesn't affect anyone but the athletes at the end of the day. And it's so awful that this even has to become a conversation for them. Okay, and scene. Let us go on. So we see Avery Brundage go to Germany, and we meet Leni Riefenstahl, and we meet probably the most terrifying portrayer of Goebbels that we've ever seen.
Yes, the Goebbels in this movie is so scary. It made me shudder.
Avery Brundage makes a corrupt bargain where he's going to build something for the Germans and get some benefits out of it. And America's going to come to the Olympics. So everybody wins. We go back to Ohio, where seeing Jesse manage the racism of everyday life at Ohio State, which is hugely depressing.
The football coach is a big racist who won't let black men on the team. I love it when racists are proven wrong to their faces. He goes to championships in Michigan right after having an injury, and he breaks, was it 4 world records?
Yes. It was 3 world records and 1 that he tied with. And it is really exciting. And they do a really good job making this exciting. Running is not an inherently interesting thing to watch. Running is a very interior activity. And this might as well be as good a time to talk about the director. Stephen Hopkins deserves a lot of praise for his direction of this film. And he is probably the perfect director for this film, or his type of director. He is a director who has deep bench of experience working in television. He's worked in mid-level dramas and films that need to be brought in on time, on budget. Also, we know that television shows often adhere to really punishing timetables and need to be super efficient. He's also worked a bunch as a producer, so he's a good money guy. So he's efficient with his budget, he's efficient with his talent, and he's really efficiently making this movie. And all of these performances are really strong and they hit their marks. A director like him would set the stage for making sure that all of that is happening. The movie itself isn't particularly inventive, but it gets everything done and the story is efficient and it's an efficiently made movie. You see the competence throughout this movie. And those are the people working in the film industry who don't get enough credit. This is the point where Jesse meets the other girl, right?
Yes. He is in love with this girl that he had the daughter with, but he meets this other smoking hot girl at a smoking hot club where they're celebrating his incredible accomplishments in Michigan.
And he starts bringing her around with him, and his girlfriend back home sees this in the newspaper and is devastated, as one would be if you found out your intended was hanging out with another girl while he had promised you that he was going to make an honest woman out of you at some point. And, we see Jesse getting a little distracted by that. And then there was this great scene that happened here where Sudeikis shows up at his hotel room after this has been going on for a little bit. And they have a conversation about this and whether or not this is who Jesse actually wants to be and what he wants out of life. And there's a line that was my choice dialogue of this film, which was, "The choices you're making won't even feel like choices until it's too late."
That is wisdom. I think if we ever get to doing a Patreon, we should make samplers of that.
I honestly, not to Queen Latifah, Jason Sudeikis' performance here, but I found that moment a particularly moving piece of acting from him. The way he said that and the way that Stephan James reacted to it was very moving and also profoundly poignant.
Yeah, and I expect that this scene must have gone into his reel or whatever the pitch was for Ted Lasso, because you see him doing supportive coach so well.
Yeah.
And that is an incredible line, and it's so true for how everybody undermines themselves in this world.
Yeah. And he's speaking from his own experience. He's separated from his wife because he has chosen the sport, and also the fact that he has a lot of regrets from his own Olympic aspirations that didn't work out. And it was a really well performed scene that just is kind of one of those moments, at the heart of this movie are conversations like this.
Yeah, and Snyder, there's one point where he asks Jesse Owens, why are you wasting time in this little job when you need to be training, and Jesse Owens tells him, I need to support my daughter. And Snyder says, "You didn't tell me you had a daughter." And then that comes back later when Snyder says it comes out that he has a daughter. Jesse Owens says, "You didn't tell me you had a daughter."
You didn't ask.
Yeah.
Oh, I loved that Snyder got him this no-show job so he can focus on his track and field work. Snyder's like a genuinely supportive, decent person in the midst of all of this casual and not casual racism in Ohio, and really treats Jesse just like another human being. Jesse goes home and makes amends to his girlfriend, and they get married immediately, which is adorable. And then, Jesse is on track for the Olympics, and this gentleman from the NAACP shows up at his house and asks him to boycott the Olympics because making that statement is really important, because of Hitler and Hitler's stance. And this scene is agonizing. It's agonizing to watch Jesse negotiate this scene, because there is that part of him that feels like he has to make the principled stance, but he also recognizes that, this is his opportunity, and he sees it as the only time that he is not a black man, where he is just the best, is those 10 seconds when he's running. And I was, watching it, and I just thought, well, everybody's right here, everybody's right. Nobody's wrong about the fact that like Hitler's terrible, but also what is the principled stance going to do for Jesse Owens as an athlete? Where is that going to get him? And I thought this scene and other points in the movie does a really good job across the board demonstrating the tremendous pressure and expectations we have historically put on Black athletes to be, to represent certain political things, while also being excellent at their sport, and also not to be too divisive. I just rewatched OJ Made in America, and there are some statements that Jesse makes about needing to do things for his family and needing to do things for himself that are very similar to things that O.J. Simpson said. That very different motivation. I want to be clear. Jesse Owens and O.J. Simpson, no, not similar in any way in terms of their character or their morality or what they represent in this world. But, O.J. Simpson felt very similarly, where he didn't want to get involved in the Black Power movement because he was experiencing success on this level where he wanted to be celebrated for it. And, and then they cut to people like Tommy Smith and John Carlos at the 1968 Olympics when they did the Black Power fist and were immediately escorted off the Olympics because it was too political. But also I think that OJ's motivations, this is a whole topic for a whole different show. OJ was motivated by really different things and different ends and results, and got to enjoy different luxuries because of people like Jesse Owens and Tommy Smith and John Carlos, and Muhammad Ali, and people who made real sacrifices to be citizens before athletes. And I'll get into how we rewarded Jesse Owens in this country for what he accomplished, if I can hold myself back at the end of the show, because I'm furious about it. Like, there's a lot of precedents of how boycotts screw the athletes. And what does it do? What did it do when America didn't go to Russia for the Olympics in 1980? Did it stop the, the war in Afghanistan? No, it didn't. Did it do anything besides represent a principled stance from a country which, as we'll talk about later, and throughout this and have already talked about, really doesn't have a whole lot of legs to stand on when it comes to either foreign policy or domestic policy in terms of how it treats people.
You know, whenever I'm watching an Olympic opening ceremony, I just get swept up in watching all the athletes from all the nations walking through, and I'll find myself thinking and posting, wouldn't it be great if we could always get along this well? It gives this brief sense of the world as it could be, and then we go back to the world as it is. We have already met one Leni Riefenstahl in here, played by Carice Van Houten. I don't know what to make of whether this movie whitewashes her. I think this is a good time also for me to sing a little Tom Lehrer song from the 60s, which goes, every single German dances to the strains of the I was not a Nazi polka.
Yep.
What do you think? Do you think this movie whitewashes Leni Riefenstahl? It definitely, to me, makes her in a way, a kind of proto every rotten thing they say about white feminism, which is mostly true thing, because you see what she's dealing with as a female director, making Nazi propaganda, and you see her awkwardly translating things between Goebbels and Brundage and other people. And it just gets to me that, like, so many of these people in the German film industry had worked with Jews early, and it made no difference. I don't want to like her, and I don't really, although I thought it was a good performance.
Yeah, I also thought it was a good performance, and I really like Carice Van Houten a lot. I wouldn't describe it necessarily as a whitewash as much as she got a sympathetic edit. I feel like we had access to the quandary of being an artist in that time period in Germany, where you were able to get a job, but the job was making the greatest movie that's ever been made about the Nazis and the triumph of white men and white people and of Nazism. And, so it's like she made this beautiful movie about the ickiest thing in the world. I feel like there's a lot of moral relativism in this movie. With Leni, with Avery, with the IOC. There's a lot of people having to, there's a lot of compromising stuff for the short term of things in this film. And also just even a sort of, what's the point of taking a stance when the house always wins? But at the same time, history is not going to be kind to you if you dance with the devil and then later on you're like, I was just doing what was in front of me. The thing with like a Leni, for example, she had the means to get up and get out. Some people didn't have choices in the same way. If you're a good-looking German with artistic accomplishments, like, you could get up and you could go. You could take your talent elsewhere. And so I felt, to your point, I felt like it was sympathetic cut of Leni Riefenstahl, and I don't think she ever apologized for her work in glorifying the Third Reich. I don't feel like she's earned it. But I think like they did kind of make her seem like she was experiencing some things that maybe Leni Riefenstahl didn't deserve to be seen experiencing.
Yeah, and like Goebbels like insults her to her face in a semi-backhanded compliment sort of way that is somewhat analogous to the modern phenomenon known as negging. There's all these scenes of Goebbels being a jerk to her where she's doing her best to hold her own, and if she weren't making Nazi propaganda, I'd have some sympathy. And I want to talk about Eulace Peacock, too. I don't think Jesse Owens boycotting would have made one darn bit of difference. So he comes back from this meeting and everyone is listening to the radio where Max Schmeling has just beaten Joe Louis. And again, a piece of context that we talked about. Joe Louis would subsequently knock out Max Schmeling, but Max Schmeling appears to have genuinely been someone who was swept along by history because he Jewish children in his hotel room. He hid Jewish children in his hotel room during Kristallnacht. Another interesting note is years later, Joe Louis, like many Black sports professionals and entertainers of his generation, was screwed out of money by his managers. But Max Schmeling came to visit him and showed up and said, I think in tears was the quote I saw, and he said, Joe, I never said those things about you. And Max Schmeling actually gave money to Joe Louis when he was old and sort of broke. Eulace Peacock.
Oh, yes.
Let's talk about Eulace Peacock. He is this other Black runner who he has a glare, but you realize this is just him being a competitor. It isn't about the one Black runner versus the other Black runner. He's just being a competitor and psyching him out with his Proto Phelps face. But they run into each other later, and Eulace Peacock has messed up his leg and he wants to be friends, and it's a nice scene that they have together. And then Eulace tells him to stick it up Hitler's ass. And then Larry Snyder is on the boat to Germany with them, and he's traveling in steerage with Jesse and Dave because he's going on his own dime.
I loved that Jesse went to bat for Snyder and was like, no, he has to be here with me, and he's the only person who can get me to run this way, and I need him.
They arrive at the stadium. There's a cheering crowd. There are Fräuleins handing them flowers, and there are the two Jewish athletes who we meet. We meet Marty Glickman and Sam Stoller, and there's a moment there that I sort of love where one of them takes out his Magen David, that's the Jewish star on his necklace, and waves it in one of the German officers' faces with this grin.
We have a fun moment of fan service where Jesse is supposed to get a pair of sneakers, and Snyder goes out and gets him a pair of Adidas.
Yes, I saw this, and that story is actually true of the shoes not coming from England and Larry having to go off and look for Adi Dassler. And I was like, where have I heard that name before? And yes, Adi Dassler and his brother, founders of Adidas and Puma, both big Nazi collaborators. But yeah, he made the shoes.
But Hitler's least favorite instrument of the 1936 Olympics won a bunch of races wearing them. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
This scene, also when we first see Jesse going into the stadium, which I mentioned earlier, Stephan James does such a good job in this scene. I felt the overwhelmingness of that coming through him, of looking around and seeing 110,000 people, and the fear and the anxiety and the tension of that moment that he went out on the field for the first time to run. And thought that this moment in particular, he's good through the entire movie. But this was just a great moment for him where you see his face reacting to what he is experiencing and just how incredible it is, and also how terrifying this moment is, and how he's been working for this moment his entire life. And I thought he really nailed that. Mm-hmm. And we see him win. And boy, does he ever. And Avery Brundage is trying to get Hitler to shake hands with Jesse Owens, but Hitler had to bail and couldn't stick around. And I was like, did you really want to meet Hitler though, Jesse Owens?
No, that was Brundage being a false advocate and trying to rub things in people's faces in a way that would rebound on Stoller and Glickman, my fellow tribesmen. Yeah, and there's like back and forth on Hitler not shaking his hand. Did Hitler shake his hand? Did Hitler not shake his hand? Was Hitler not shaking winners' hands unless they were German? And I don't necessarily care. And my note here was, oh, damn it, Leni, he ruined your photo op. And I wrote here, was any German's mind changed by seeing Black and Jewish athletes excel? Like, I want to believe that seeing excellence from someone from an other group can change hearts and minds, but it doesn't happen, and I don't understand why. Humans make me so sad.
Yeah, the idea, I mean, it's a beautiful idea, but it's so naive. The idea that if they just see that these are full-fledged three-dimensional humans with talents and gifts and decency, that they'll change their minds. And yet it does nothing. Although, honestly, the best thing they could have done is ruin Leni's propaganda film about the German triumph with Jesse Owens repeatedly winning races. That was the move to play.
Did it change anything that they embarrassed Hitler? I guess
No.
It makes us feel good now. I'm glad it happened.
Then we get into a really interesting section of this story where Jesse is doing his long jumping and he vaults twice, and a German athlete named Luz, is it Luz or Luz?
I think it's Luz Long makes a showing for decency by showing him where to jump from. Now, it's uncertain. The thing with him putting the shirt down did not happen. Jesse Owens himself embroidered the story decades later to make Luz Long's son, who grew up without a dad, feel good by adding a few details to it. But Luz makes an amazing showing of human decency, and I had not heard of Luz Long before this.
Same.
And he shakes his hand. It's such a feel-good moment where I could believe that this changed one German's mind. I would feel a lot better, and I still wouldn't feel that much better because it should have changed everybody's mind.
When this started happening in the movie, I actually immediately went for the internet because I said, there's no way this could have happened and this guy wasn't shot on sight. I've seen Rocky IV, but yet I go to the internet and look it up, and this is a real thing that happened. As you said, aspects of it might have been, amped up over time, but the fact that this young man stood in sportsmanship alongside Jesse Owens and then was punished for it, put on the front lines of the war, and basically kind of set up to die at some point during that time period. It was an act of sportsmanship and bravery, the kind of thing that you're supposed to see at the Olympics, and of course the kind of thing that you're going to get punished for in a time period like this in a country like Germany was in 1936. But it's a magical scene where you actually can't believe that this is real, because, I mean, how could this have happened?
How could this have happened and it didn't change anything? And they are trying to stop Leni from making her film, and she's like, no, I'm getting on this camera myself. And Jesse goes to talk with Luz in his room, and he's such an idealist, and I think he has this glimmer of hope that he can help bring an emperor's new clothes moment. I don't know if this story is true. I do know from one of the books that I looked at that Jesse Owens did go to talk to Luz in his room at the Olympic Village later. But Luz tells this story that they sent a girl to his room, and he has a girlfriend. He didn't sleep with her, but he says, I think she was ordered to get pregnant by me. And then he says a line that I will be mentioning again in Choice Dialogue. I love my country, but our government is going crazy.
This was such a gem of a little performance in this movie. What's true and what's not is is up for speculation, but they did develop a friendship and they wrote to each other until Luz died in the war.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how letters from a German on the front lines would have gotten through to an American after we declared war, but they were pen pals as long as they could stay pen pals, and that's just an incredible story that I was glad to learn. Goebbels is saying that the Jews can't run in the 400 meter, which sucks for Marty and Sam, who I rapidly came to love. This has to happen because Avery Brundage compromised himself giving advice about how to build that embassy in Washington. And I have to, Avery Brundage, that has to be the most white shoe wasp name I've ever heard.
Yeah, he's kind of garbage. And yet, all worked out okay for him. Yet another white man somehow manages to succeed. But Jesse brings home 4 gold medals and very successfully stuck it up Hitler's ass.
Yes, on behalf of one Eulace Peacock. And I loved, there was, when they're replacing Marty and Sam, that Jesse says, I'm not running this unless Marty and Sam say it's okay. And I felt so much for those guys. There was a story about, like, one of them outran, I can't remember if it was the Nets or the Yankees, but it was years later, he could still run faster than them. And I'm sorry for those guys that they didn't get to have their moment, even though I'm glad Jesse Owens won 4 medals. But he comes home from the Olympics, and he still can't walk in the front door at a dinner being held in his honor.
Nope, he has to take the back entrance, and he's not okay with it, but he accepts it and still goes into the dinner to be celebrated. And then the most infuriating part of this film happens, which is we find out what happened to Jesse Owens after did this heroic action of going to Germany, proving American might to the entire world. And one of the things that happened is that Franklin Roosevelt, who we were just praising recently, didn't bother to call him to congratulate him for his victory, which is something that presidents typically did at the time. I don't know if that's something that still happens. I can picture our previous president in the year of our Lord 2024, not bothering to call Olympic champions if he didn't like them. But I can't see our current one doing that. But FDR didn't at any point bother to congratulate him. He was told of many opportunities for endorsements that led him to come back to America, and all of those dried up. He wasn't able to get employment for a long time.
Yeah, Jesse came back from the Olympics and raced horses. And I guess there were these dumb standards about amateur status for a long time that really messed things over for athletes who weren't born rich. The movie doesn't really mention all of the disgraceful things that happened to Jesse Owens after the Olympics, but they're quite easy to look up online, and it's a shame. And, like, eventually he started to get some later recognition and make some money, but not fair.
No, really, like, really sad how unappreciated he was in this country because, as I've mentioned on many occasions, I love me some PBS Ken Burns, and we've sent Black men to war on behalf of this country during time periods where they have enjoyed lesser status than their white counterparts in this country, and they have experienced more enlightened views of race in other countries, like fighting for the French during World War I, and then coming back here and then being treated like garbage and being told, yeah, it's great that you had rights over there, but you don't have those here, and that's just too bad. And this to me is like a case like that writ large. And I know we're going to talk about it next week when we talk about one Steve Prefontaine, who is treated like a deity in running who didn't even medal at the Munich Olympics. I don't know what it is that he did that is so darn special besides have a name that works really well as a nickname in crossword puzzles. And yet we confer different levels of status and different hero status on people in this country in a way that's really depressing. And I know there is a TV movie about Jesse Owens, but we had a buffet of Prefontaine movies to choose from because apparently this guy is just so darn special. And it took us until the year of our Lord 2016, and it took Canada, France, and Germany to make a movie about American hero and pioneer Jesse Owens that was signed off on by his family, because I guess we have to make Marvel movies or something. We don't have money to make a movie about Jesse Owens, but we have enough money to make crap in America. Even with this, like, it's still $5 million, but they made a really good looking movie for $5 million and a really well acted movie for $5 million. And I walked away from the research I did about this movie furious. And I'm just like disappointed in America. And I'm disappointed in the American film industry. Because yet again, like we can't even show appreciation for these people who've done iconic things and heroic things on behalf of this country, because, you know, like we have better movies to make or whatever. And I was disappointed because I didn't realize how rough his life was after the Olympics until I was reading about it for this show. And I was really bummed out by that, because he did something really incredible. And also, I think it was really brave for any of these athletes to go to Germany in 1936. It was brave for those Jewish athletes to go. It was brave for Black athletes to go. It was not a safe place for them. The IOC put all of these people into a lion's den where bad things could have happened to them. 30 years later, the IOC did that again in Munich. And I don't think that Germany will get the opportunity to host another Olympics for some time.
All right. So with that, shall we do the choice dialogue?
Yes. So I mentioned earlier the piece of dialogue I liked, but I'm going to repeat it because I loved it so much. The choices you're making won't even feel like choices until it's too late.
I loved that. That was also on my list of choice dialogue. Another thing on my list of choice dialogue was something that Jesse's dad says to the NAACP people when he says, he stays, they ain't gonna notice. He goes, he can come back with a drawer full of medals, and they will hate him even worse than before. JC, you do what you want now, you understand me? Ain't gonna make no difference no how.
That was so rough. When his dad said that, that broke my heart.
And his dad was right. His dad was right about the experience that exceptional people have over and over again, trying to prove themselves when they're not from a dominant group in a country. My next choice was from this conversation with Eulace Peacock, where Jesse says, to do what? And Eulace says, to get in over there to Berlin and to stick it up Hitler's ass, courtesy of Eulace Peacock. And finally, Luz Long's line that I mentioned already, I love my country, but our government is going crazy.
This was a good one.
Yes, I was surprised. It was a little movie that could with not much.
Yeah. Should we go through our rankings?
Yes, let's do our rankings. For outward appearances, makeup, hair, I gave it an 8. They did a good job on anyone. They didn't have anything extraordinary to do, but everything looked right.
Yeah, I gave it a 9.
Okay. Acting and casting, I gave it an 8.5. Everyone did a really good job with what they had. I loved Sudeikis. They did a great job rounding up a cast for this. nobody did anything that was going to turn heads and get the film an Oscar nod, but they all did really fine work.
I give it a 9 for acting and casting. I thought that Stephan James was just so wonderful as Jesse. It wasn't a showy performance. He was very quiet, but he carried so much on his face, and it was a very physical performance as well. I thought he was just wonderful in this. Sudeikis was wonderful. I thought the acting and casting was great.
And kudos to the German actor for that heart-winning performance, however brief it was, as Luz Long. Passage of Time, I gave it an 8. I had no trouble telling where and when we were or how much time was passing, and they gave very good road markers as guideposts.
Yeah, I gave Passage of Time a 9 because they told me where and when I was every step of the way, including that amazing 28 months. I was like, thank you. I know exactly what we're working with here. So I was thrilled.
And they were subtle with it too, but I liked at the beginning where he's shown running and then they have that UPA font appearing saying where he's running and what the year is, and that occasionally happens, but it's subtly done, and I like how they use his era font for it. Costuming, I gave it an 8. Sudeikis wore the same suit a bunch of times, but I guess that seems like such a small quibble.
I was thinking about this because I know that we talked about this particular thing very briefly at one point. And I thought about it a lot more than I think is probably necessary. And I thought maybe he only brought one suit with him. Maybe he only had one suit, like the character.
Mm-hmm.
Which, didn't stop Bonnie and Clyde from being a super fashionable movie. Because they weren't stopping and getting tailored all the time. They did not have the bandwidth to do that. But nevertheless, I gave costuming a 7.
Mm-hmm.
Quality of the script. I gave this a 7. It's formula. But I think that they added some really great touches to it. I thought it was a solid script. It had some solid lines. It had some really lovely moments.
Yeah, I gave the script an 8 because it does it feel mildly formulaic? Yes, but there's a heart in there, and all those things that the actors did to elevate the material, they must have seen that there when they got it, because they have so many good people in this who were working for low scale, probably. For accuracy, I gave it 7.5, which might be the highest accuracy score I've given. I think I'm being I did ding it for, there was that one thing based on an embroidery that Jesse Owens himself told about Luz Long and the shirt. But that's still a very high score for accuracy for us to give, and very good for the genre in general, where there are so many deletions. And I think the error is in sins of omission, which we've talked about not being that significant since you can't show everything. They wanted to wrap it up with a happy postscript, which is not necessarily what Jesse Owens got. Their choice to give us the feel good at the end also fell in what we've talked to about omission versus.
Yeah, I gave it a 5 for accuracy, and I'm digging it really hard for the sympathetic cut of Leni and of Avery Brundage, who I don't think deserved to be shown as a conflicted person.
Mm-hmm.
Goebbels was a villain, but that doesn't mean that the people around him need to be sympathetic in order to really demonstrate how awful he was. Yeah. Yeah, I get it. I know what a bad dude he was, and by making Leni even the slightest bit sympathetic, I was just kind of rolling my eyes at that, and it didn't track. And I was really bothered by that. And also Avery Brundage, was kind of sleazy. And I felt like he was given like unearned sympathy for the conflict that he was in.
Yeah, it is very easy. You're already very rich. Don't give them advice about how to build their embassy. You have nothing to gain from this. For storytelling, I gave it a 7. It was standard, but it was good for what it was. I noticed that this went longer than a lot of biopics we've seen. Like, it wasn't afraid to flirt with going well past 2 hours, and a lot of the ones we've seen go to 2 hours and change, and they're strict about it because they know what happens with a lot of these pictures. But I was never bored. I was engrossed. So for a simple arrangement of storytelling, I think it did a very good job.
I gave it a 5. I appreciated that it didn't shy away from bad stuff. It didn't like blow me away with inventiveness, and I did feel like, to your point, like even the ending they gave him, which was not that great, was still like too pat for how crappy we treated Jesse Owens when he returned to this country.
Yeah, I think I may have seen the TV movie, and they do go into him having to run against horses, but it would have been ages ago that I saw that. Okay, so production value, I gave it a 7.5. It wasn't going to wow you, but it was a textbook of how to do a lot with a little.
Same, 7. I thought that this movie looked fabulous, particularly for the budget they had. They made $5 million go, I think, as far as it can. Also thought that the acting was so strong that it made up for any potential shortcomings of, the fact that that no one in the crowd had faces. I was really impressed by what they were able to pull off here.
Production, direction, decision making, 7.5, and this is where I ding it for being overly sympathetic towards Avery Brundage and Leni Riefenstahl. But in terms of making do on a small budget and all of the decisions that directors and producers make, otherwise solid.
I gave it an 8 for production and direction decision making. Stephen Hopkins deserves a great deal of credit for what this film is. This isn't a perfect movie, but it's very, very, very well done, particularly with the budget. And also, I did ding it, like going back to the Leni of it all. Mm-hmm. I just can't with that. With any sort of like sympathetic aspects of Leni and Avery in particular.
For Do We Care, I gave it a 10. I cared a lot about Jesse. I cared about his teammate Dave. I cared about Snyder and him coming to peace with his past screw-ups and not being in the Olympics, and the bond that they were forming. I cared about the girlfriend and the adorable, adorable little girl. I cared a lot, and that's what makes this might be my 4th time saying this, and I know it's a cliche, a little movie that could.
I'm right with you on this. I gave Do We Care a 9, and yeah, to your point, like not only did I care very deeply about Jesse, I cared about his dad. I really wanted to see his dad happy. I cared about his baby. I cared about his wife. I cared about his relationship with Snyder, and I cared about Snyder. I cared all over the place in this movie. I thought that this movie gave us a lot of people to root for.
Yeah. Yeah. So my average came to 8 on the dot.
Okay. Mine came to 7.5.
Oh my gosh. So that comes to 7.75, and once again, not doing second opinion. Okay, so do we want to do our outro?
If you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps.
Tune in next week when we'll be talking about Prefontaine, a biopic about a runner whose name sounds familiar despite his having never won an Olympic medal, in honor of the upcoming 2024 Olympics.
Thanks, Rena. It was good to see you, and have a great night.
You too, Sarah. Bye-bye.
Bye.